So we've been talking about generosity versus cynicism and various other gratitude. So I want to talk this morning about cultivating benevolence. And it's one aspect of generosity. It's a non in a non-material sense, although it could involve material acts as well. But we don't often talk about it because it's pretty broad. But it is an important part of the path, another means of uh, reducing suffering, fostering connection with others. And let me begin with a disclaimer about benevolence because this trips some folks up. It has tripped me up in the past. And that is to say, or generosity in any form for that matter, because our motives for such actions, benevolent actions, generous actions, are multifaceted. They are never pure as the driven snow. They contain, yes, a large component of heartfelt compassion, a wish to care for others, but there's also an element of self-interest. Our ego wants to be a good person. So that's the kind of, when the Buddha talked about the gift of committing acts of generosity or benevolence, he talked about what comes back to us in terms of our own sense of ourselves. And there's a little bit of ego in there, and that's fine. I mean, there's nothing that's normal, nothing we want to criticize ourselves about. But benevolence, simply stated, is good intentions toward living beings, including ourselves. And it takes many forms. This goodwill is present in warmth and friendliness, compassion, just ordinary decency, fair play, kindness, altruism, generosity, love. The list goes on and on. Just think of benevolence as an umbrella term for many forms of goodness. And loving kindness is a particular directed or focused form of benevolence because the benevolent heart leans toward others. It's not neutral, it's not indifferent, it opens and leans towards others. And it is the opposite of ill will, coldness, prejudice, selfishness, cruelty, aggression, all those aspects of human behavior. And we've all been there. We've all been benevolent. We all know what it's like to wish someone well, which is just the simplest form of benevolence. It's seen and has been for millennia across all faith traditions. It starts with telling children to share their toys with other kids. It starts with saints talking about the golden rule over the decades, over the millennia rather. It has many benefits, but benevolence toward oneself is needed to fulfill three fundamental needs. Excuse me. Um, those are avoiding harm, getting our needs met skillfully, and connecting to others. And when these needs are met, we shift into a more relaxed, peaceful mode. Our heart opens, and there's freedom and there's spaciousness in there. We feel peaceful, we feel happy, we feel loving. It's just a nice place to rest. Because benevolence toward others, to start with that one, reduces conflict, it builds trust, it fosters connection, and it typically elicits reciprocal treatment from others in return. You know, simple acts of kindness are contagious. There's a bumper sticker to that, it was to that effect. And culturally and societally, benevolence promotes the rule of law. It educates our children with positive values. It feeds the hungry. It supports human rights. It offers humanitarian aid. It works for peace. All of those actions have as their underpinning benevolence. Benevolence toward our planet tries to protect endangered species, reduce climate change, make good choices about how we treat the planet. And the fact that benevolence involves enlightened self interest, which I alluded to earlier, makes it no less beneficial or less virtuous. At this time in history, when we feel increasingly stressed and isolated, when relationships often stand on shaky ground, uncertainty, we talked about that the other day with cynicism. When international conflicts are fueled by dwindling resources, increasingly lethal weapons, when humanity is dumping 9 billion tons of carbon each year into the atmosphere. Boy, do we ever need benevolence. The other thing I love about this concept is that it is an antidote to the three poisons that the Buddha taught of greed, hatred, and delusion. And he argued, and I certainly agree, that most of the world's misery is a function of those three poisons. You could probably subsume pretty much human dysfunction into one of those three poisons of greed, hatred, and by delusion, he means seeing things not as they are, not seeing things truthfully, but as we wish them to be. You know, throughout history, benevolence has often been described as a warm ember glowing in the human heart. I love that metaphor, a warm ember glowing in the human heart. It's not just simple acts of kindness. It is a philosophy. It is a way of seeing the world. It is a lens through which we can look at the world. Often it's just a quiet attribute, sort of thriving, lying in the shadows, these small, uncelebrated acts that come together to weave the fabric of a compassionate society. It isn't plastered on billboards. It's not shouted from the rooftops. It's not generally made up of grand gestures. But nonetheless, these small benevolent acts resonate with a powerful force like a ripple effect that touches lives that we can't even track, we can't even imagine. Benevolence reminds us that we're all interconnected, that your suffering diminishes us all, my suffering diminishes us all. My joy, your joy elevates us all. Now, let me be clear. This benevolence is not naivete. It doesn't require us to be doormats or blindly act without discernment. True benevolence has to be coupled with wisdom and discernment. Of course, discernment being a vehicle for wisdom. And understanding, benevolence has to come from a place of understanding the complexities of the human condition. You know, as often you hear people say, benevolence isn't an act of giving a hand out, but offering a hand up. It's about empowering others to overcome their struggles, not enabling dependence. We don't just enable dependence. You know, sometimes benevolence takes the form of what's called tough love. It's about recognizing that sometimes tough love is the truest form of kindness. In our crazy world, increasingly obsessed with self-promotion and instant gratification, this quiet power of benevolence can seem almost revolutionary. It can seem almost counter to the cultural milieu, to the cultural zeitgeist. And what it does, it takes us out of the ego. It requires us to step outside of ourselves, to see beyond our immediate needs and desires, to recognize the shared humanity that binds us together. And boy, do we need that in this world today. Benevolence is a choice. We set an intention to see the world, to act from benevolence, a conscious decision to contribute to something larger than ourselves, to leave the world a little brighter than we found it. And in that choice, this act of selfless giving, we discover something profound. That true benevolence in the end is not just about helping others, as the Buddha taught. It's about enriching our own souls. So those are my thoughts this morning on benevolence.